The December wind cut through the thin fabric of Jasmine Parker's coat like a blade. She sat on the cold metal bench of the bus stop, her 9-year-old daughter Zoe pressed against her side, both wrapped in layers that were never quite enough. The city moved around them with the indifference of a river flowing past stones. People hurried by with shopping bags full of gifts, their breath visible in the frozen air, their faces flushed with the warmth of somewhere to go. Jasmine and Zoe had nowhere. Jasmine held a styrofoam cup of soup in her gloved hands, a gift from the shelter they'd left that morning. The soup was lukewarm now, but it was something. Zoe clutched her own cup, sipping slowly to make it last. Her small fingers were red despite the mittens Jasmine had bought from the thrift store last week. The child's eyes tracked the passing strangers with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that made Jasmine's chest tighten. Resignation. A 9-year-old shouldn't know that feeling. Zoe looked up at her mother, and in her eyes Jasmine saw the question before it came. "Mama, is tomorrow Christmas?" Her voice was small, almost apologetic for asking. Jasmine's throat constricted. She forced a smile that felt like breaking glass. "Yes, baby. Tomorrow's Christmas." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package, no bigger than her palm. The wrapping paper was from the dollar store, already creasing at the corners. "I got you something special." Zoe took the gift with careful hands, as if it were made of something precious and fragile. She didn't open it. She just held it, and that restraint, that learned patience in the face of so little, broke something in Jasmine's heart all over again. "Thank you, Mama," Zoe whispered. For a moment Jasmine closed her eyes and let herself remember. 5 years ago, almost to the day, the house with the vaulted ceilings and the chandelier that scattered light like diamonds across the marble floor. The Christmas tree that touched the ceiling, decorated by professionals who came and went in efficient silence. Zoe running down the curved staircase in her pajamas, squealing at the mountain of presents beneath the tree. Marcus laughing, his arm around Jasmine's waist, and for that moment she had believed they were happy. She had believed she belonged there. The memory dissolved like smoke. When she opened her eyes, she was back on the bench, holding a cup of cooling soup, watching her daughter try not to shiver. A postal van pulled up to the curb. The driver got out, checking addresses, and approached them with a white envelope in his hand. "Mrs. Parker?" "Jasmine Parker." His voice was professional but not unkind. Jasmine stood, confusion flickering across her face. No one sent her mail anymore. She'd lost that privilege when she lost the house, the address, the life. "Yes, that's me." He handed her the envelope. It was heavy, expensive paper with a gold-embossed border. Her name was written in elegant calligraphy. "Special delivery. Happy holidays?" He nodded and returned to his van. Jasmine stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. Zoe pressed closer, craning her neck to see. "What is it, Mama?" With trembling fingers, Jasmine tore open the seal. Inside was a card, cream-colored and thick. The words were printed in gold. "Victoria Parker requests the honor of your presence at the annual charity Christmas gala." Below, in the same calligraphy as the envelope, a handwritten note. "Jasmine, you and Zoe should have been with us. Let's leave the past behind. Marcus." Jasmine's hands began to shake. The card slipped slightly in her grasp, and she had to tighten her grip to keep it from falling. Zoe tugged at her sleeve. "What does it say?" Jasmine couldn't speak. Her mind was spinning through 1,000 thoughts at once, each one crashing into the next. Marcus, the house, the party. Why now? Why? After 5 years of silence, of lawyers and cold emails and custody arrangements that felt more like transactions than anything involving their child. Why reach out now, when she was at her lowest, when she had nothing left to lose and even less to offer? But then Zoe's voice cut through the chaos. "Is it from Daddy?" The hope in that word, Daddy, was almost unbearable. Jasmine looked down at her daughter, at the thin face that still held traces of baby fat, at the eyes that wanted so desperately to believe in something good. And Jasmine felt her resolve, already so fragile, begin to crack. She wanted to say no. She wanted to crumple the invitation, and throw it in the nearest trash can and take Zoe's hand and walk away from anything connected to Marcus Parker and his world of marble floors and crystal glasses and smiles that hid teeth. But she couldn't, because Zoe was cold and Zoe was hungry, and Zoe deserved one night, just one night, where she didn't have to sleep in a shelter or on a friend's couch or in the back of a bus station. That night, Jasmine lay awake in the narrow cot at the shelter, Zoe curled against her side, breathing softly in sleep. The invitation sat on the small table beside them, the gold lettering catching the dim light from the hallway. Jasmine picked it up and read the note again. Let's leave the past behind. As if the past was something that could be discarded like an old coat. As if 5 years of struggling to survive, of watching her daughter grow up in poverty, of hating herself for every failure, could be erased with an invitation to a party. But maybe Marcus had changed. Maybe he'd realized what he'd done. Maybe he wanted to help. The thought was dangerous, Jasmine knew. It was the kind of thought that had kept her trapped for so long. The belief that if she just waited, if she just stayed quiet, if she just didn't make waves, things would get better. That belief had cost her everything. Still, she whispered into the darkness, "One more time. I'll try one more time." The night of the party arrived with the weight of inevitability. Jasmine had borrowed a dress from a woman at the shelter, a simple black thing that was too loose in some places and too tight in others, but it was clean and it didn't have any visible stains. Zoe wore her Sunday dress, the one Jasmine had saved for months to buy, navy blue with a white collar. They looked presentable, Jasmine told herself. They looked like they belonged. But as they stood before the gates of the Parker mansion, Jasmine felt the lie of that thought settle over her like a shroud. The estate sprawled before them, a monument to wealth that seemed almost obscene in its excess. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, their polished surfaces reflecting the thousands of lights strung through the trees. Valets in crisp uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, opening doors for guests in furs and designer gowns. The house itself glowed like something out of a fairy tale, every window blazing with light, the sound of a live orchestra drifting out into the cold night air. Jasmine and Zoe had walked from the bus stop, a 30-minute journey that left their cheeks numb and their fingers stiff. They stood at the gate, and Jasmine felt Zoe's hand slip into hers, small and trusting. A security guard approached them, his face professionally neutral. "Names, please?" Jasmine swallowed. "Jasmine Parker, and my daughter, Zoe." The guard checked his clipboard, running his finger down the list. When he found her name, something shifted in his expression. Not hostility exactly, but a kind of knowing dismissal. "Ah, charity guests. You'll need to use the kitchen entrance." He pointed toward the side of the house, where a narrow path led away from the grand front doors. The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Charity guests, as if they were recipients of benevolence rather than invited family. Zoe tugged at her hand. "Mama, why can't we go in the front like everyone else?" Jasmine's voice caught in her throat. She wanted to turn around, to take Zoe's hand and walk back through the gates and never look back. But Zoe was looking up at her with those wide, hopeful eyes, and Jasmine couldn't bear to extinguish that small light. She forced her voice to remain steady. "It's okay, baby. It doesn't matter which door we use." They walked the narrow path to the kitchen entrance, passing other guests who didn't even glance in their direction. The kitchen door was plain, utilitarian, nothing like the grand entrance with its wreaths and ribbons and warm glow. A staff member opened it for them, his face carefully blank. "This way, please." Inside, the house was even more overwhelming than Jasmine remembered. The kitchen alone was larger than most apartments, all stainless steel and gleaming surfaces. They were led through a hallway lined with photographs of the Parker family, generations of pale faces in gilded frames, and Jasmine noticed that there were no photos of her, no evidence that she had ever been part of this family at all. The great room opened before them like a cathedral. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, each one a small galaxy of light. The Christmas tree stood in the center, 15 feet tall, and decorated with ornaments that probably cost more than Jasmine made in a year when she'd had a job. Guests milled about in clusters, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter bright and sharp as breaking glass. They were beautiful people, confident people, people who had never known what it meant to sleep in a shelter or skip meals or wear someone else's too loose dress. Jasmine and Zoe stood at the edge of the room, and it felt like standing at the edge of an ocean, watching a world they could see but never touch. Jasmine pulled her coat tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how shabby it looked, how out of place she was. Victoria Parker appeared from the crowd like a queen emerging from her court. She was immaculate in a cream-colored gown, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her smile bright and cold as winter sun. She glided toward them with her arms slightly extended, as if she might embrace Jasmine, but she stopped just short of actual contact. "Jasmine, darling, how brave of you to come." Victoria's voice was warm honey over ice. She turned to Zoe, and her smile softened, though her eyes remained calculating. "And little Zoe, my goodness, you've grown so much. Marcus will be so pleased to see you both." She placed a hand on Jasmine's shoulder, the touch light and impersonal, like one might touch a dog of uncertain temperament. "He's terribly busy with the other guests right now, but I'm sure he'll find time for you. In the meantime, the staff will take care of you." Before Jasmine could respond, Victoria had already turned away, her attention claimed by a couple in matching fur-trimmed coats. Jasmine stood there, her automatic response already forming on her lips. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker." The words tasted like ash. A server approached with a tray of champagne, offering glasses to nearby guests. He passed Jasmine without pausing, as if she were invisible. Zoe pressed closer to her mother's side. "Mama, I'm hungry." Jasmine looked around, trying to find where food might be served, but all she saw were servers circulating with elaborate hors d'oeuvres for the main guests. She gathered what remained of her courage and approached one of them. "Excuse me, could my daughter get something to eat?" The server, a young woman with a professional smile, glanced at her briefly. "The charity buffet is set up in the garden area, ma'am. Through those doors." She pointed toward French doors that led outside. The garden. In December, Jasmine felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. She took Zoe's hand and led her through the crowd, past conversations about ski trips and summer homes and investment portfolios, toward the doors that would take them outside into the cold. The garden area had been set up with a few folding tables covered in plastic tablecloths. Space heaters glowed orange in the corners, fighting a losing battle against the December night. A modest buffet was laid out, nothing like the elaborate displays inside. A handful of other families stood around, people who looked like Jasmine felt, out of place, uncomfortable, aware that they were here not as guests, but as exhibits in someone else's demonstration of generosity. Zoe looked up at her mother. "Why aren't we inside with everyone else?" Jasmine knelt down so she was at eye level with her daughter. The words she wanted to say caught in her throat. She wanted to say, "Because we're different. Because we're black and poor, and your father married me when he thought it was fashionable and discarded me when it became inconvenient. Because this isn't charity, it's humiliation dressed up in pretty paper and ribbons." But she couldn't say any of that to a 9-year-old. So instead, she brushed a strand of hair from Zoe's face and forced a smile. "Because this is where they set up food for us, sweetie. Come on, let's get you something warm to eat." As they stood in the cold, eating lukewarm food from plastic plates, Jasmine felt the weight of every choice that had led her to this moment. The invitation wasn't an olive branch. It was a reminder of her place, a carefully orchestrated display designed to show her exactly how far she'd fallen and how high Marcus had remained. Inside, through the glass doors, she could see the party continuing in its warm, bright bubble, and somewhere in that crowd was Marcus, the man who had once promised her forever, the man who had given her a daughter and then taken away everything else. She hadn't seen him yet, but she could feel his presence in every calculated detail of this night, in every subtle cruelty disguised as kindness. Zoe tugged at her sleeve. pulling her back to the present. "Mama, when will Daddy come talk to us?" Jasmine looked down at her daughter's hopeful face and felt something shift inside her, something that had been bending for years finally reaching its breaking point. "Soon, baby," she said, but even as she spoke, she wasn't sure if she was lying or telling the truth. She wasn't sure of anything anymore except the cold and the plastic plate in her hands, and the growing certainty that she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. The cold of the garden seeped through Jasmine's borrowed dress, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled in her chest. She watched Zoe pick at her food, the child's appetite dulled by something Jasmine recognized all too well, the awareness of being unwanted. Other charity guests huddled near the space heaters, their conversations muted, their body language defensive. They were all playing the same role in tonight's performance, props in Victoria Parker's annual demonstration of benevolence. Through the glass doors, Jasmine could see the main party unfolding in its orchestrated splendor. Women in jewel-toned gowns moved like tropical birds through the warm light. Men in tailored suits gathered in tight circles, their laughter carrying the confidence of people who had never questioned their right to exist in such spaces. And somewhere among them was Marcus. A memory surfaced, unbidden, sharp, and painful as glass. 7 years ago, at a party not unlike this one, Marcus had introduced her to his colleagues. "This is my wife, Jasmine." The words had been correct, but his tone had carried something else, something apologetic. One of the men had raised an eyebrow. "Social worker, isn't that right?" "Interesting choice, Marcus." The words had been polite, but the meaning underneath was clear. "You don't belong here." Even then, when she'd still had the house and the title and the ring, she'd been an outsider. Jasmine had learned to make herself smaller in those spaces, to laugh at jokes she didn't find funny, to nod along with conversations about vacation homes and private schools and investments she didn't understand. She'd convinced herself it was just adjustment, that eventually she would find her footing. But the ground had never solidified beneath her feet, and when Marcus asked for the divorce, citing irreconcilable differences in a voice drained of all emotion, she'd signed the papers because she believed what his lawyer had told her. This was the best she could hope for. $50,000, no alimony, no claim to the house or assets. Just a clean break, and the promise that he would still be part of Zoe's life. The money had lasted 2 years. Then Jasmine's job had downsized, and daycare costs had eaten through her savings, and the cheap apartment had raised its rent, and suddenly she was juggling bills like a circus act, always one payment away from disaster. When the disaster finally came, it came quickly. Eviction notice, belongings on the curb, the shelter system that was never meant to be permanent, but somehow became it. And through it all, Marcus had remained in his mansion, throwing parties, making donations to charities, his face appearing in the society pages with a new woman on his arm every few months. He'd maintained his visitation schedule with Zoe, every other Sunday for exactly 4 hours, but he'd never asked how Jasmine was managing. Never offered additional help, never acknowledged that the mother of his child was drowning. Zoe's voice pulled her back to the present. "Mama, can we go inside?" "I'm cold." Before Jasmine could answer, a server approached their table. He was young, perhaps college-aged, wearing the same uniform as the staff inside, but with the addition of a heavy coat. His face held professional neutrality, but Jasmine caught a flicker of something else in his eyes, pity perhaps, or discomfort at his assigned role. "Mrs. Parker, Mrs. Victoria Parker has requested that you report to the main house. There's a maintenance issue she'd like your assistance with." Jasmine blinked, confusion warring with the familiar impulse to comply. "Maintenance issue?" The server shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "She said you used to work in social services, that you're good with your hands. The fireplace in the great room is malfunctioning, and the technician couldn't make it tonight. She thought you might be able to help." The words landed like stones. Good with your hands, as if Jasmine were hired help, a handyman to be called upon when the expensive guests needed something fixed. The presumption of it, the casual dismissal of any boundary between guest and servant, should have outraged her. But Jasmine felt that old familiar impulse rising instead, the need to be useful, to earn her place, to prove she wasn't a burden. Zoe looked up at her with those wide, hopeful eyes. Maybe if you help, Grandma Victoria will let us come inside where it's warm. The logic was childish but not wrong. Jasmine felt the trap of it, the way compliance had always been framed as the path to acceptance. Just be helpful. Just don't make trouble. Just wait quietly and maybe, eventually, they'll let you in from the cold. Okay, Jasmine heard herself say. I'll take a look. She followed the server through the French doors, Zoe's small hand clasped in hers. The warmth of the house enveloped them immediately, almost painful after the cold. The great room was even more crowded now, the party reaching its crescendo. Jasmine felt every eye turned toward her as she entered, felt the weight of judgment in those glances. Her borrowed dress suddenly felt shabby beyond redemption, her shoes scuffed and cheap. She wanted to disappear, to fold herself into nothing and slip away unseen. Victoria materialized from the crowd, her smile brittle and bright. Jasmine, thank you so much for helping. The fireplace has been temperamental all evening, and we can't have our guests getting cold. She gestured toward the massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall. I'm sure it's just a simple fix. You always were so practical. The word practical hung in the air like an insult disguised as a compliment. Jasmine nodded, not trusting her voice, and approached the fireplace. It was an architectural masterpiece, fieldstone rising to the ceiling, the mantel hand-carved from a single piece of oak. A low fire burned behind the decorative screen, but Victoria was right. Something was off. The flue wasn't drawing properly, smoke occasionally puffing back into the room. Jasmine knelt before the fireplace, aware of her position, literally on her knees before the wealth and comfort of Marcos's world. The symbolism wasn't lost on her, but she pushed it aside and focused on the mechanical problem. She found the panel that opened the damper control, reached inside, and immediately felt the issue. Something was blocking the flue mechanism. Her fingers closed around what felt like a folder, wedged deep in the stone channel where it wouldn't normally be accessible. She pulled it free, and a cloud of soot and dust came with it. The folder was leather, old and expensive, the kind of thing that cost more than Jasmine spent on groceries in a month. It had been shoved into the fireplace mechanism deliberately, hidden where no casual inspection would find it. Jasmine's heart began to hammer. She glanced around, but the party continued obliviously. Zoe was examining an ornament on the Christmas tree, her back turned. Victoria had been pulled into conversation with a cluster of guests near the bar. No one was watching. Jasmine tucked the folder inside her coat, against her ribs where it wouldn't be visible. Her hands were shaking as she adjusted the damper, cleared the remaining debris, and watched the smoke begin to draw properly up the chimney. She stood, brushing soot from her knees, and caught Victoria's eye across the room. "All fixed," Jasmine called out, forcing her voice to remain steady. Victoria gave her a dismissive wave and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Wonderful. So clever of you." Jasmine took Zoe's hand and moved toward the hallway, toward the bathroom where she could examine what she'd found in private. But as she navigated through the crowd, a hand caught her arm. She turned, and there was Marcus. He looked exactly as she remembered and somehow completely different. The same sharp features, the same carefully styled hair going silver at the temples, the same expensive cologne that used to make her feel safe and now just made her feel small. But his eyes, when they met hers, held nothing. No warmth, no recognition of shared history, no acknowledgement that she was the mother of his child, and not just another charity case at his mother's party. Jasmine. His voice was neutral, professionally pleasant. "I'm glad you could make it. Zoe looks well." The casual dismissal in those words, "glad you could make it," as if she were a distant acquaintance, rather than the woman who'd shared his bed and his life, ignited something in Jasmine's chest. But the old habits were too strong. She felt herself shrinking, her voice becoming smaller, apologetic. "Thank you for inviting us. Zoe was excited to see you. Could we talk? Just for a few minutes?" Marcus glanced at his watch, an expensive piece that caught the light. I'm actually in the middle of something important. Perhaps later, before you leave." It wasn't really a question. He was already turning away, his attention claimed by someone more important, someone who belonged in his world. Jasmine stood frozen as he walked away, feeling Zoe's hand tighten in hers. The child had heard the dismissal, understood it in the way children do, with a clarity that adults learn to excuse and rationalize. Jasmine saw the hurt flicker across her daughter's face and felt answering rage build in her own chest. But she couldn't make a scene. Not here, not now. So she did what she'd always done. She swallowed the anger, forced a smile for Zoe, and headed for the bathroom with the stolen folder pressed against her ribs like a secret. The bathroom was on the second floor, away from the party's noise. It was larger than the bedroom Jasmine and Zoe had shared in their last apartment. All marble and gold fixtures and soft lighting that was supposed to be flattering, but just felt like exposure. Jasmine locked the door, sat on the closed toilet lid, and pulled out the folder with trembling hands. The leather was cool and smooth, barely marked by its time in the fireplace. Someone had hidden this recently, she realized. The soot hadn't had time to really penetrate. She opened it. The documents inside were pristine, organized in neat stacks with labeled tabs. Jasmine's background in social services had taught her to read bureaucratic paperwork, but these were different. Financial records, invoices, bank statements. She pulled out the first sheet and began to read. Parker Holdings, LLC. A company name she vaguely recognized from her marriage, something Marcus had mentioned in passing as one of his investment vehicles. The document was an invoice for renovation work on a property in the historic district, billed to a company called Heritage Restoration Group. The amount was staggering, $375,000 for work on a single building. Jasmine flipped to the next page. Another invoice, this one for $400,000. Then another, and another. All from companies with official-sounding names, all billing Parker Holdings for work that seemed impossibly expensive. But it was the bank statements that made her breath catch. Transfers from Parker Holdings to various accounts, each one coded with a reference number. She traced one of the reference numbers back to an earlier document and found something that made the room tilt around her. The companies didn't exist. Heritage Restoration Group had no business license, no employees, no actual projects. It was a shell, a phantom, and the bank account receiving the payments belonged to Marcus himself, filtered through a trust registered in his mother's name. Jasmine's hands shook as she pulled out more documents. The pattern repeated over and over. Fake invoices from fake companies, all funneling money from Parker Holdings into accounts controlled by the Parker family. She found tax returns that showed Parker Holdings reporting massive losses, claiming deductions for all this fake work, paying almost nothing in taxes despite the obvious wealth on display downstairs. Then she found her own name. The document was a bank statement from 5 years ago, from the account that had held her divorce settlement. $50,000 deposited in one lump sum. But 3 months later, there was a transfer out, $25,000, moved to an account labeled Parker Family Trust, Administrative Fees. Jasmine read it again, certain she was misunderstanding. But the numbers were clear. Marcus had given her $50,000 with one hand and taken half of it back with the other. She'd signed something during the divorce, she remembered now, something Marcus's lawyer had glossed over quickly. Just standard paperwork, authorization for administrative handling of funds. She'd been so overwhelmed, so desperate to have it over with, that she hadn't read carefully. He'd stolen from her. While she was struggling to feed their daughter, while she was juggling bills and skipping meals and eventually losing everything, Marcus had been siphoning money from her account to feed his family's fraudulent empire. The rage that swept through Jasmine was unlike anything she'd ever felt. It was clean and sharp and clarifying, burning away years of self-doubt and self-blame. She wasn't poor because she'd failed. She wasn't homeless because she hadn't tried hard enough. She'd been robbed, systematically and deliberately, by the man who'd promised to love her. A knock on the door made her jump. "Jasmine? You in there?" A woman's voice, familiar but uncertain. Jasmine quickly shoved the documents back in the folder and opened the door. Amanda Lawrence stood in the hallway, her face a mixture of shock and concern. Amanda had worked with Jasmine at the social services office years ago, before the layoffs. They'd been friends once, before Jasmine's life had fallen apart, and she'd been too ashamed to maintain contact. "Amanda." Jasmine's voice came out rough, and she realized she'd been crying without noticing. Amanda's eyes swept over her, taking in the borrowed dress, the soot stains, the trembling hands. "Jesus, Jasmine, what are you doing here?" It wasn't accusatory, just bewildered. "I was invited by Marcus." The words tasted bitter. "It's a charity event." Understanding dawned on Amanda's face, followed by anger that Jasmine recognized as belonging to someone who'd seen too many systems fail people who deserved better. "That son of a bitch. He invited you here as—" She stopped herself, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Come on, let's not do this in the hallway." They moved to a small sitting room down the hall, away from the party. Jasmine clutched the folder, her knuckles white. Amanda closed the door and turned to her. "Talk to me. What's going on?" The story came out in fragments. The divorce, the money that had disappeared too quickly, the years of struggle, the invitation that had seemed like an olive branch, but was really just another humiliation. And then Jasmine told her about the folder, about what she'd found in the fireplace. Amanda's expression grew darker with every sentence. When Jasmine finished, Amanda held out her hand. "Let me see." Jasmine handed over the folder. Amanda was a paralegal now, working for a law firm downtown. She'd spent the last 3 years learning to read documents exactly like these. She flipped through the pages with increasing focus, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Holy shit!" Amanda looked up, her eyes wide. "Jasmine, this is massive. This isn't just hiding money from you, this is tax fraud, wire fraud, possibly RICO if they've been doing it long enough. These documents show years of systematic theft. But would anyone believe me?" The question came out small, infected by years of being told her concerns didn't matter, that she was overreacting, that she was the problem. Amanda grabbed her shoulders, forcing eye contact. "Jasmine, listen to me. This isn't about belief. This is evidence. Documentary evidence, in their own handwriting with their own signatures. A judge doesn't need to believe you when you have this." She gestured with the folder. "But we need to be smart about this. If Marcus realizes these documents are missing, if he figures out you have them—" A scream from downstairs cut through the air. Both women froze. Then came shouting, confused voices, the sound of something shattering. Amanda moved to the door, opening it carefully. The noise from the party had changed quality, no longer festive, but chaotic. Jasmine followed her to the top of the stairs. Below, in the great room, she could see guests clustered near the fireplace, pointing and talking urgently. Victoria was directing staff, her face flushed with anger. And in the center of it all was Marcus on his phone, barking orders to someone. "The files," Amanda whispered. "He's looking for the files." A cold certainty settled over Jasmine. If Marcus found her now, if he suspected what she'd discovered, he could make those documents disappear. He could make her disappear, bury her under lawyers and accusations until no one would listen. The pattern was familiar, the powerful closing ranks protecting their own, crushing anyone who threatened their world. But something had changed in Jasmine during those minutes in the bathroom, reading the proof of her own systematic erasure. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She thought of Zoe, downstairs somewhere in that crowd, probably scared by the commotion. She thought of the years ahead, of her daughter growing up believing that powerlessness was the natural state of people like them. "I need to get Zoe and get out of here," Jasmine said. Her voice was steady now, clear. "But I'm not giving these back." Amanda nodded. My car's parked 2 blocks away. I'll meet you there. But Jasmine, she grabbed her friend's arm. Be careful. Marcus isn't just some asshole ex-husband anymore. You're threatening everything he's built. People like that are dangerous when they're cornered. Jasmine tucked the folder back inside her coat and headed for the stairs. The great room was in controlled chaos, guests being ushered toward the exits, staff searching behind furniture and under tables. Victoria stood near the fireplace, interrogating a trembling server about who'd been in the room when the panel had last been checked. Jasmine spotted Zoe near the Christmas tree, standing alone and frightened. She moved toward her daughter, trying to stay peripheral to the main action. Just another charity guest collecting her child and leaving. But Marcus saw her. His eyes locked onto hers across the room, and for just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Suspicion, or perhaps calculation. He started toward her, cutting through the crowd with purpose. Jasmine grabbed Zoe's hand and headed for the nearest exit. Not the kitchen door they'd entered through, but the main entrance. The door she'd been denied earlier. She heard Marcus call her name, heard his footsteps behind them, but she didn't stop. The cold night air hit her face as they burst through the front door and down the steps. Behind them, Marcus appeared in the doorway. Jasmine, wait! His voice had shifted, no longer the dismissive tone from earlier, but something harder, more urgent. We need to talk. Now. She turned to face him, Zoe pressed against her side. They stood at the bottom of the steps, the mansion looming behind Marcus, every window blazing with light. For a moment, Jasmine saw the scene as others might. A wealthy man in his tuxedo, standing in his castle, demanding that the poor woman in the borrowed dress explain herself. Something broke loose in Jasmine's chest, some dam that had held for too long. When she spoke, her voice carried across the lawn, loud enough that several guests emerging from the party stopped to listen. No, Marcus, we don't need to talk. We're done talking. I've been talking for 5 years, begging for crumbs, accepting whatever you decided to give, and telling myself I should be grateful. Her voice shook, but not with fear anymore. With rage, pure and clean and righteous. I'm done being quiet. I'm done making myself small so you can feel big. Marcus descended the steps, his hand outstretched in a gesture meant to be calming. Jasmine, you're upset. Let's discuss this inside privately. So you can make me disappear again? The words came out sharp. So you can tell me I'm overreacting, that I don't understand, that I should just trust you like I always have. You're making a scene. His voice had gone cold, the veneer of concern dropping. You're embarrassing yourself in front of everyone. Victoria appeared in the doorway, flanked by security. Several guests had gathered on the porch now, watching the spectacle. Jasmine felt their judgment, their whispered commentary, their certainty that she was exactly what they'd always suspected. Inappropriate, unstable, not suited for Marcus's world. But for the first time in her life, she didn't care. Let them watch. Let them judge. She was done performing for an audience that would never approve of her anyway. I'm leaving, Jasmine said. She tightened her grip on Zoe's hand. And you're going to let us go. Because if you don't, Marcus, I will start screaming what I know right here, right now, in front of all your important friends. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Fear, perhaps. Or the dawning realization that she wasn't bluffing. He held up his hands, stepping back. Fine, go. But this isn't over, Jasmine. You can't just... Yes, I can. She cut him off, her voice ringing clear in the cold air. Watch me. She turned and walked away, Zoe running to keep pace beside her. Behind them, the mansion blazed with light and warmth and wealth. Ahead, the street was dark and cold and uncertain. But Jasmine walked toward it without looking back, one hand clutching her daughter, the other pressing the folder against her ribs like armor. At the end of the driveway, Zoe looked up at her mother. Mama, what's happening? Jasmine stopped, knelt down so she was eye level with her daughter. The child's face was scared, but also something else. Awed, maybe, or impressed. "Baby, I need you to understand something. For a long time, I let people make me feel small. I let them tell me I wasn't enough, that I didn't deserve to be heard. But I was wrong to do that." She cupped Zoe's face in her hands. "You are never, ever too small to matter. Your voice always deserves to be heard. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop being quiet." Zoe nodded solemnly, though Jasmine wasn't sure how much she truly understood. But someday she would. Someday her daughter would face her own moments of choice, her own chances to be silent or to speak. And Jasmine wanted to make sure that when that day came, Zoe would remember this night. They reached the street, where Amanda waited in her car, engine running, passenger door already open. Jasmine and Zoe climbed in, and as they pulled away, Jasmine allowed herself one glance in the side mirror. The Parker mansion grew smaller behind them, its lights fading into the distance like a dream dissolving in daylight. Amanda drove in silence for several blocks before speaking. "Where do you want to go?" Jasmine looked down at the folder in her lap. "Somewhere we can make copies of these, lots of copies. And then I think we need to call a lawyer, and maybe a reporter." She paused, feeling the weight of what she was about to set in motion. "I'm going to burn it all down, Amanda. Everything he built on lies and theft. I'm going to make sure everyone knows." Amanda glanced at her, a fierce smile crossing her face. "Good. It's about damn time." In the back seat, Zoe had fallen asleep, exhausted by the night's events. Jasmine reached back and adjusted her daughter's coat, making sure she was warm. Outside, the city passed by in a blur of lights and shadows. Somewhere in that darkness was a shelter bed, or a friend's couch, or another temporary solution to the permanent problem of having nowhere to go. But Jasmine felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly. That was too fragile, too easily crushed. What she felt was purpose, direction. The certainty that she was finally moving toward something instead of just running from it. The documents in her lap represented years of systematic theft, of a wealthy family's casual cruelty toward anyone they deemed beneath them. But they also represented something else. Proof. Validation that she hadn't been crazy or incompetent or any of the other things she'd been made to feel. She'd been wronged deliberately and methodically, and now she had the evidence to prove it. Tomorrow she would go to a lawyer. She would tell her story, show her documents, and demand justice. The system would probably disappoint her. Systems usually did. But this time, she wouldn't be asking for permission or mercy. She would be demanding what was rightfully hers. The car stopped at a red light. In the window of a closed shop, Jasmine caught her reflection, a woman in a borrowed dress, with soot on her knees and determination in her eyes. She looked like someone who'd survived, someone who'd learned the hard way that silence costs more than speaking ever could. The light turned green, and they drove on into the night toward whatever came next. Behind them, in his mansion of marble and lies, Marcus Parker was probably already calling his lawyers, already spinning the narrative that would paint her as vindictive or delusional or greedy. He would use every weapon at his disposal to discredit her, to make her story unbelievable. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what a woman with nothing left to lose could do. He'd forgotten that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who's already lost everything and has finally decided to stop being afraid. Jasmine pressed her hand against the folder, feeling the pages beneath the leather, each one a nail in the coffin of Marcus's carefully constructed life. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Tonight, she allowed herself this moment of quiet satisfaction, driving through the cold December darkness with her daughter sleeping peacefully behind her, and justice for once within her grasp. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour copy shop hummed overhead as Jasmine fed page after page into the machine. It was 3 in the morning, and the only other person in the shop was a tired clerk who'd stopped asking questions after Amanda had slipped him an extra 20. The documents multiplied, stack after stack of evidence, each copy another insurance policy against the power Marcus wielded. Zoe slept on a bench near the window, wrapped in Amanda's coat, her small body curled tight against the cold. Jasmine glanced at her daughter between pages, making sure she was still breathing deeply, still lost in whatever dreams children had when their world was shifting beneath them. Amanda sat at a computer terminal, uploading scans to 3 different cloud storage services. When the last page emerged, Jasmine gathered the originals into a manila envelope. Amanda had already called a lawyer friend who specialized in financial crimes, someone willing to meet them at 7 that morning. 6 hours to wait. 6 hours during which Marcus would be marshalling his own defenses, preparing to crush her before she could become a real threat. But Jasmine had spent 5 years being crushed. This, whatever came next, couldn't be worse than what she'd already survived. They left the copy shop as first light began to soften the edges of the city. Amanda drove them to her apartment, made coffee, and they sat watching the clock crawl towards 7. When Zoe woke, Jasmine held her and tried to explain what was happening. Her daughter's eyes were solemn, older than they should have been. The lawyer's office was in a converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and cold lighting. Sarah Chen met them at the door, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes. She ushered them into a conference room and spread the documents across a long table. For an hour, Sarah read in silence, occasionally making notes. Jasmine sat across from her, Zoe coloring quietly in a corner. The waiting was agony, watching someone else judge whether her pain was legitimate, whether her evidence was sufficient. Finally, Sarah looked up. The documents showed systematic fraud, spanning at least a decade. Wire fraud, tax evasion, theft from multiple parties, including Jasmine. The transfer from her divorce settlement had been buried in legal language, technically authorized but ethically reprehensible. Sarah laid out the strategy: criminal complaint to the district attorney, civil suit to void the divorce settlement, contact with the IRS whistleblower program. Each step calculated to move fast and publicly, preventing Marcus from shaping the narrative. Jasmine asked if anyone would believe her against Marcus's money and connections. Sarah's smile was sharp. Rich men had been getting away with fraud for centuries because people assumed no one would believe victims. But Jasmine had documentary evidence in the defendant's own handwriting. This wasn't her word against his. Amanda asked about retaliation. Sarah explained they would move publicly. She had a contact at the Tribune who specialized in white-collar crime. Once the story hit the news, any action Marcus took would look like retaliation, strengthening Jasmine's case. Jasmine felt tears threatening. She wasn't alone anymore. Sarah told her she was never supposed to fight alone. Justice wasn't a solo sport, and Jasmine had just recruited very motivated players. By noon, Ethan Harper from the Tribune sat in the conference room, recording equipment ready. He asked Jasmine to tell her story from the beginning. So she talked about meeting Marcus, the wedding that seemed like a fairy tale, about small cruelties that accumulated, comments about her work, the way his family never accepted her, the isolation that grew until she was completely alone. She talked about the divorce, signatures on documents she hadn't understood, money that disappeared too quickly, and she talked about the last 5 years, shelters, food banks, careful calculations of which bills to pay, the shame of standing in line for free meals, watching Zoe wear too small clothes, the exhaustion of poverty that consumed every thought, leaving no space for hope beyond simple survival. When she finished, silence filled the room. Ethan checked his notes. He'd covered financial crimes for 8 years, seen powerful people cheat systems without consequence. But what Marcus had done, stealing from his child's mother while throwing charity galas, was a special kind of evil. The story would run tomorrow morning, front page. Everyone would know. Jasmine thought about Zoe, about the years ahead, about whether she wanted her daughter believing that silence was survival. She thought about other women crushed by men like Marcus, who'd signed away rights because they didn't know better. She was ready. The newspaper hit stands at 6 the next morning. By 7, Jasmine's phone rang with calls from reporters, lawyers, people claiming to be Marcus's victims. Sarah fielded most, but a few got through. Women cheated of wages, contractors never paid, investors who'd watched money disappear. By 9, police executed a search warrant on Marcus's office. By 10, the IRS opened an investigation. By noon, Marcus Parker was arrested on charges of wire fraud, tax evasion, and theft. Jasmine watched news coverage from Amanda's apartment, Zoe pressed against her. Footage showed Marcus led from his office in handcuffs, face pale and shocked, expensive suit suddenly ridiculous against police uniforms. Victoria appeared on courthouse steps, composed facade cracking as reporters shouted questions. Zoe asked if her father was in trouble. Jasmine pulled her daughter close, explaining he'd done wrong things and had to answer for them, but none of it was Zoe's fault. When Zoe asked if they'd still be poor, Jasmine answered honestly. She didn't know what happened next, but they'd face it together, and she'd never stop fighting for them. The civil case moved faster than Jasmine dared hope. With criminal charges filed and evidence overwhelming, Marcus's lawyers pushed for settlement. Sarah negotiated ruthlessly, determined not to let another rich man buy his way out. The final number was $500,000, Marcus's half of marital assets that should have been Jasmine's, plus damages plus compensation for stolen money. It wasn't justice exactly. Money couldn't return lost years, couldn't erase homelessness trauma, couldn't undo damage to Zoe's childhood, but it was acknowledgement in law's cold language that she'd been wronged. 3 months later, Jasmine stood in the doorway of a small apartment. 2 bedrooms, aging appliances, worn carpet, but it was hers. The lease in her name, deposit paid from money she'd earned. She'd found work in social services at an organization helping families transition from homelessness. Pay wasn't great, but steady, and she understood her clients like most social workers couldn't. She'd lived their reality. Zoe ran past into the apartment, squealing at having her own room. Jasmine smiled, feeling something unfamiliar. Not quite happiness, but space where happiness might grow. That evening, after Zoe slept, Jasmine stood at the window looking at the city. Somewhere, Marcus awaited trial. Assets frozen, reputation destroyed. Victoria had fled to Connecticut, unable to face social exile. The mansion was being sold for fines and restitution. Jasmine felt no triumph, no savage satisfaction. Just relief that truth had been told, that the system worked this time. And beneath that, something stronger. Knowledge that she'd made it happen. She'd found her voice, refused silence, fought back when everything told her to stay quiet. Her phone buzzed. Amanda texted about a woman at the bus stop who looked like Jasmine had 6 months ago. Amanda had given her Jasmine's number. Jasmine smiled and replied it was more than okay. She sat at the small kitchen table. Her social work diploma was still boxed, but she'd frame it and hang it, not representing past success, but future. She was enrolled in night classes to finish her degree, to build something that couldn't be taken. A memory surfaced. That cold bus shelter, watching Zoe shiver, feeling beaten into something small and worthless. The invitation arriving, hope flickering despite everything, desperate belief that maybe Marcus would help if she just waited quietly. She'd been so wrong. Things only got better when she stopped waiting, stopped being quiet, stopped accepting crumbs, and demanding the full meal she deserved. Next morning, Jasmine woke early and walked to the bus stop she'd once called home. A woman sat there now, young and tired, a child sleeping against her shoulder. Jasmine recognized the posture, the careful stillness of someone trying not to take up space in a world with no room for her. Jasmine sat beside her. The woman tensed. Jasmine spoke gently, saying she'd been exactly where this woman was, and wanted to help if she'd let her. She pulled out a card with her name and the organization's number. They had resources, housing assistance, job placement, legal help. And if she just needed someone who understood, Jasmine was there. She didn't have to do this alone. The woman stared at the card, suspicion warring with hope, asking why anyone would help. Jasmine thought about all the reasons, because someone should have helped her, because the system needed fixing, because silence had cost everything, and speaking up had saved her. But she said something simpler. She remembered feeling invisible, and she promised this woman she wasn't. She mattered. Her voice mattered. And when ready to use it, Jasmine would help make sure people listened. The woman took the card with shaking hands. They sat together as the city woke around them. Two women broken by the same system. One showing the other that survival was possible, that life existed after the fall. Above them, winter sun climbed higher, cold and bright. But in its light, Jasmine saw the path ahead clearly for the first time in years. Not easy, not smooth, but hers to walk, with her daughter beside her and her voice finally heard. She thought about the Christmas party, standing in cold while others basked in warmth. The moment she chose to stop accepting crumbs and demand justice. That night had been a crucible, burning away everything she'd believed about her place, about whether she had the right to take up space and refuse to disappear. The woman asked Jasmine's name, introduced herself as Nicole, then asked what mattered. Did it get better? Really? Jasmine looked at desperation and hope warring in Nicole's eyes. She thought about honesty, not false comfort, but truth with compassion. It got different, she said. Some days were still hard, but she'd stopped feeling like the world was happening to her and started feeling like she could happen to it instead. That made all the difference. Nicole nodded slowly. Understanding passed between them without more words. They were survivors learning to be more than that. Jasmine walked home through streets she was beginning to know. She was one of them now, or close enough the distance could be measured, but she carried the memory of being outside like a scar, visible, permanent, reminding where she'd been and why she couldn't look away from those still trapped. At home, Zoe was making cereal with careful concentration. They spent the day doing normal things, library, park, hot chocolate from a cafe where they were just customers. These small moments stitched together made a life. That evening, as Zoe slept, Jasmine sat with tea and pulled out a notebook. She began to write, not a journal but a record. Every detail about navigating systems designed to help but often grinding people down. Every lesson learned. Every resource that actually helped versus promised much and delivered nothing. Someday, this would be a guide. For Nicole and women like her, for everyone needing to know the system could be beaten, that silence didn't equal safety, that their voice mattered when everyone said it didn't. She wrote into the night, apartment quiet, city humming beyond windows. As her pen moved across pages documenting pain and triumph, Jasmine understood this was her inheritance. Not money or property or anything that could be stolen, but knowledge that she'd survived, fought back, refused to disappear, and that she'd spend the rest of her life making sure others knew they could do the same.